part of I Remember the Service. Would you please state your name?
Yeah, Carlton Reed.
All right, and where do you live?
I live in North Hoosick.
I see we are a native of Hoosick Falls?
I'm a native of Hoosick Falls. I was born on Cary Avenue.
On Cary, yeah. All right, now, would you tell us a little about before you went to the service, about your life in Hoosick Falls, or when you went and so
Well,
forth?
I left Hoosick Falls when I was 16 years old, when I graduated from high school. And then I was away for about 50 years. And then when I retired, I was teaching at the University of Massachusetts. And I retired there. I moved back to the area. And
Now you live in the area. All right, would you tell us a little about your youth before you went into the service? How old were you when you went into the service?
I was 29 when I went in the service.
So you had quite a life before the service.
Yeah, I went to Pratt Institute and went to Hobart College, and I graduated from New York University and Columbia University. I got a degree. My doctorate came from New York University. And then I went into teaching, and I was teaching in Nyack when the war started, and the Army offered a program that was called a VOC, Volunteer Officer Candidate. And I went and took the intelligence test and physical and met with the Officer Candidate Board and was accepted. I went in the Army with the understanding I would go to Fort Belvoir, Virginia after basic training because I was doing industrial camouflage before the war. And not many people knew about that.
Yeah, what year was this that we're talking about? Approximately.
1942, 43.
Well, we're in the 42, 43
Yeah,
area,
44.
all right.
And they ran a program at Pratt on industrial camouflage. So I graduated from that, and so I was doing some of that freelance in New York. And then I signed up for this volunteer officer candidate program, and when I got through my basic training in Spartanburg, South Carolina, Camp Croft, they were going to send me to Fort Benning, Georgia, which was infantry officer training program. And I said, I have no interest in the infantry whatsoever. But they didn't have any quotas to send people to the engineering school for officer training. And so I could take a discharge. And all my buddies said, you don't have guts enough to take a discharge. And I said, like hell I don't. So I took a discharge, and which is a strange thing in itself that the Army left that loophole. And then on my way home from South Carolina, I stopped in Washington and was interviewed by the Red Cross to become a combat field director. And so by the time I got home from the Army, the same day I was Red Cross field director. And I was assigned immediately to the infantry.
So you got to the infantry no matter what,
yeah,
huh?
so I spent all the time I was in the service was with the infantry.
All right, and what the Red Cross, after, did they train you for their field?
Yeah, I went to American University, which the Red Cross had taken over in Washington, and they used that as a training center. And we were taught a lot about social work and how to work with, people who had problems. And then we were given a lot of money, which we could use to loan to soldiers or give them when they needed money on emergency leaves and so forth.
And where did they station you as the Red Cross? Where did the Red Cross send you?
Oh, well, for training they sent me to
American
University.
Yeah, but what did you do after you graduated?
And then I got sent down to Front Royal, Virginia camp of embarkation, and I was going to be sent overseas just as a casual, could, be assigned anyplace. And then a call came through for the 103rd Division, needed somebody, and so I got sent there.
I see. And where were they stationed in?
And they were at Camp Claiborne in Louisiana. And the day I arrived, they were packed up, ready to move out in the morning on maneuvers. So I went out on Louisiana maneuvers with one blanket and a half shelter hat. And nearly froze to death. As a matter of fact, life in the Army in maneuvers was actually tougher than life in combat, because occasionally in combat we'd take a town, we could be indoors and sleep and get a hot meal, but on maneuvers there was no indoor any place, and we were out there for 2 months, and it was muddy and it was awful.
All right, so then you got through the maneuvers. What happened
And then
then?
we moved, we never went back to Camp Claiborne. We went to Camp Howes in Texas, and we stayed there until sometime in October 44, and then we shipped out to go to Europe.
And you were a Red Cross person attached to the 103rd.
Yeah. And I was attached to the 411th Infantry Regiment. We had 4 men. One had division headquarters, and 1 in each military regiment. And my responsibility was the 411th Infantry Regiment. So then we went in training in Howes, and then we were trained as Air Transport Division. We were, we did flying in gliders and landing. We never had to jump though, but we all wore a parachute in case we had to jump. These little gliders were little wooden framed flying machines with just a canvas around them and a ramp to walk on solidly inside. And the first time we flew, there was a young lieutenant, probably 18 years old, who was the pilot in charge. And so when we're up here flying, that you were towed in that time. They would tow you off the ground, up in the air, and then cut loose, and then you're on your own. And he said, "How many of you would like to do a loop?" And everybody said yes, because I knew you couldn't loop a glider with 21 men in it. But he looped. I looked up, you know, and here's the Red River, and I'm down, and here's the sky, and it felt like we're going right out of the bottom of the plane, you know.
Yeah.
So, but we never had to fly in the glider in combat, because when we were taken out of the lines in Europe to go to the west side of the Rhine, we were supposed to fly across in the gliders, but the Army took the Remagen Bridge, which the Germans had left standing, so we got across the river without flying across. And by the time we got to the bridge, it was so beaten up, and the Germans, of course, shelled it. And we built what the Army calls a pontoon bridge, a pontoon bridge across, which is a boat after a boat after a boat after a boat, and then with planks on top of that, we crossed them. I'll never forget in March, and the river was wild and all, going up and down. We were all smoked in. You could only see about 3 feet in front of you. MPs on there waving us on, "Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up." So that was it. And then we crossed through the rest of Germany and to Stuttgart. We took Landsberg, where Hitler had been imprisoned. And then we went down and met the American Fifth Army in Italy. We crossed the Brenner Pass, and after we were through the pass, we met the Fifth Army, and that was the end of the war.
I read there was clippings upstairs, and they mentioned one thing about you getting gasoline from a kid that you knew in Nyack. I read that. There's a clipping upstairs on that. And I understand you did get some type of recognition for valor.
Yeah.
Would you tell us a little about that, if you don't mind?
Well, one night we were assigned to a raid, some elements of the 2nd Battalion, to go into the German lines there was an SS group had moved in, and we of course had them under observation all the time, and they were looking at us all the time. And so we were assigned to move in and to kill or capture every German in this little town called Rothbach, France. I still communicate with one of the men, German men who lived in the town, who was there at that time. Jean-Pierre Müller, his name is. Anyway, so I went with this group. It was a big raid. I mean, usually, you know, just a few troops went, but this was most of the 2nd Battalion went in. And as we were moving down into the town, the Germans started to shell us. And so a lot of people got hurt then. Some were killed and many were wounded. And I picked up a wounded man and brought him back out to an aid station. And then I went back and gave first aid to a lot of people who were badly hurt. And General McAuliffe, who was our general at that time, he was with the 101st Infantry, or 101st Division, Airborne Division, at Bastogne. And he's the one, when they asked him to surrender, they were completely surrounded by the Germans. When they asked him to surrender, he supposedly said nuts to them and didn't. And so as a result of his work there, he was given command of the 103rd Division. And so when he heard what I had done, then he ordered a Bronze Star to be given to me.
That's great.
And
that's wonderful, yeah?
no heroics in it. It was
no,
just doing,
you were doing what you were there for.
What you did. And I read a while ago about doing some of these things. That we did them because of the adrenaline flowing, so that we did things that you couldn't ordinarily do. And I know this man was about 200 pounds he weighed, and I picked him up on my shoulders and carried him out. I'm sure under ordinary circumstances I couldn't possibly do it.
All right, so you said that you met up with the troops coming in from Italy, and that was the end of the war.
Yeah.
All right, what happened then when the war ended in your career?
Well, we spread out then, just taking command of all the different villages and run it, you know, like an army of occupation. And then my mother had a stroke and was dying, and so I got a leave to come home. And she died a couple of days after I got home. And so I never went back. I went back to Washington to the Red Cross, and I got discharged from that.
I see. And just a little about it. When you worked for the Red Cross and you were assigned to a division or an outfit, a battalion,
yeah.
Then you became a non-combatant, but you were there to help the people in any way that you could.
Yeah.
I see. Is that... And,
so, I never should be involved in combat, but I was, because again, I was there, and all my buddies were doing this, and so.
I see. Okay, so now you're home, you're out of the Red Cross, and now what happened to you?
Well, it's very interesting. I was in New York and still in uniform, and everything I had was packed away someplace. And I didn't know what to do. I just knew I wasn't going back to teaching in a high school. And I went to Toffanetti's restaurant. And in those days, business was such that when you went in a restaurant like that alone, they would seat you with somebody else. No privacy, you know. So I was sitting with a man I found out who was an art director in New York City. And when he found out I was interested in art, he said, "What are you doing tonight?" And I said, "Nothing." I thought I was being propositioned. So he said, "The Art Directors Club is having a seminar for you GIs and help you get located and acclimated." And so he said, "Why don't you go?" So I went and I listened. They gave a lot of lectures on different things. And so when I was through, I was ready to leave. And there was a girl at the door, and I had to hand in the card indicating who I had interviewed. And I said, "I didn't interview anybody." I said, "I'm really not interested in talking." She said, "Look, there's Dean Boudreaux over there. and he has nobody with him. Why don't you go and have him sign the card, because you know, it's my responsibility to get this card signed. So I know Dean Boudreaux, whom I knew. He was the dean at Pratt when I was a student there, and he asked me what I was going to do, and I said, I don't know, I'm looking. So he said, how would you like to teach at Pratt? So I said, that sounds good. So he said, I just talked to a young man that I almost offered the job to, and I told him to come over to the office tomorrow morning and we'd continue our discussions. But you get there ahead of him, and you got the job. So when I got there, I thought I got there early, but the man that he talked about was already there in the waiting room, but Boudreaux wasn't there. And so when he walked in, he saw me, he said, come on in, Carl. Come in, he said, go room 207 or someplace, there's a drawing class for you to teach.
And that's how you got your job in Pratt. That's very interesting.
It was really great. It was the most enjoyable teaching I ever had. I mean, I had all GIs, and for the first couple of years they were all men, and then later a few girls came in that had been in the service. And these boys worked so hard, you know, I felt guilty giving them assignments. They worked so hard, and it was such easy teaching, and we all came from a common background, a common experience that we had. We used to go sketching in Central Park, and when it was time for critique at the end of the afternoon or the morning, I'd whistle and give the infantry signal to assemble on me, so that we get together. It was a great time for teaching.
And how long did you teach at Pratt?
I was there 5 years, and then and I was doing commercial art near. I only would work like a day and a half or 2 days or something part-time. Pratt at that time hired all professional people who were doing commercial art in New York City, and most of them were alumni, so they actually were contributing a lot because they didn't pay that much. But and then my old boss at Nyack High School encouraged me to come back there to teach art, and I did. And he was the greatest educator that I have ever known. I mean, he was so advanced, and it was fun to work with him. And I went there, and I don't know, I stayed a couple of years, I guess. And then I went to work as a state supervisor for the state education department, which was an interesting experience because I traveled all over the state and evaluated art programs and tried to help them. And then I went to New Paltz, the state university there, and I taught there for 4 years, I think it was. And then I went from there to Elmira College, where I taught 1 year. And then I was working on my doctorate at that time, and I took a year off and to work on the doctorate, and I went back to the State Department too, and I worked part-time there, which was a great thing because it gave me transportation all over the state. And then after I finished there, I was wondering, you know, could a person go into a town or a city and have some impact? Could one person really make an impact on a city's education program? And so I took a job in Rochester, New York, director of art for the city schools there. And that was a great experience. I was in the 60s, you know, after all the riots. Rochester was one of the towns that was really beaten up. They had a big Negro population there. But then the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was passed. And this man who was superintendent was a sharp guy. And he had already been to Albany and found out how you would apply for these grants. And he had the forms all made. And so he was had a courier in Albany the day the governor signed this bill, and they brought him out to us. He put a bunch of secretaries to work all weekend, and next Monday morning he had them on the governor's desk, so we were in business. But we'd already spent millions of dollars that we hoped we were going to get. And I don't know, somebody would have gone to jail, I guess, if we hadn't gotten these grants.
Rochester's always been advanced in education.
Yeah. But I got a great grant got two grants, and one was for what we call art action centers, and the idea was to take youngsters who were real troublemakers and get them into a situation in art where they could use their energy constructively, creatively. So we had a lot of heavy work to do, and cutting salt blocks, you know, where they were pounding and so forth. And that was the most successful program. Students went from first grade reading level to seventh grade reading level in 1 year when they were in this program, with no extra teaching of reading. It was just they wanted to learn to read. They had all these books on ceramics and sculpture and building, and they couldn't read them, and they wanted to know. So they learned how to read. They wanted to read for the first time. And so that program was really great, and it was written up by the federal government as one of the 14 most outstanding programs in the country.
Do they exist right now? Are they doing those in the state, or that just went by like everything else?
It's like every other good thing, you know, goes by, they just dropped it and backed it.
Yeah.
And then, what was the other program we had? I can't remember. I had two of them anyway.
All right, and then you finished up in Rochester. What?
Yeah,
then
and
what?
then I had a friend who was in the art department at Southern Connecticut College, and he called me up and asked me if I would come down there and run their art education program. So I went there, and then I stayed there 2 years, and then I had another friend who was at University of Massachusetts and asked me if I would come there because they needed someone in art education there. So, as my son said, you were a lucky guy. You never had to look for a job.
Yeah.
And I was lucky, I guess.
So is that where you finished up at the University of Massachusetts?
Yeah, and then I was there for, I don't know, maybe 17 years. I had 2 sabbaticals, so I had to have been there 14 years.
Yeah, right.
And then when I retired from UMass.
UMass.
Came to Hoosick Falls.
And he came back home.
Yep.
And I noticed, I read that book you wrote, and I found it very interesting. That was articles that you had written, or?
Yeah, well, I wrote a series of articles for the Cambridge Eagle on Hoosick Falls, as I recall. Because I thought, you know, there are a lot of things that I remember about Hoosick Falls that most people don't know anything about.
Right.
I mean, they're all dead who knew about this.
Yeah.
So I wrote this series of articles, and with the understanding that I could combine them and publish it as a book. And so I did. He still owes me $500 for the articles.
Let's say, I'd like to ask you a couple more before we quit. You got married. How many children did you have?
I have 2 children.
I see.
And my son is head of the art department at Colorado College at Colorado Springs. And my daughter lives on the Cape, and she's manager for a garage.
I see.
In Wareham, Mass.
All right, and I think that's about it that I could think of as far as that gives us a good biography of your life and your service and so forth. We thank you for coming out. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Or?
No.
All right. Well,
George,